Welcome to another UTS Startups Confessions. Fantastic. So my name is Aaron. I'm the Inspiration Manager here at UTS Startups. We're joined by a very special VIP guest, Selena Griffith. Thank you so much for being here, and thank everyone here in the audience for being here. It's a long weekend. There's places you could be, but we're here to find out about something really exciting. So before we dive into that, Selena, you're the CEO and the country leader for Enactus Australia. Hands up if you've heard about Enactus before, anyone? Okay, one person, okay, good. Now hands up if you've heard about or have thought about the field of social enterprise, or doing things that make a positive impact in society to the people around you. Hands up if you've heard of that or are interested in that. Okay, so everyone's hands up. This is going to be fantastic. So first of all, why don't you tell us just in a few sentences, what is Enactus?
Okay, well, Enactus is a global network of 33 countries, and we have about 70,000 students at about just under 2,000 universities, currently working on around about 800 startups.
Wow.
So we are the largest, and we're the longest running at almost 50 years, social startup incubator in the world. We're also the largest and longest running incubator, let alone social incubator in Australia.
So there's a wealth of experience well before incubators became a thing, well before startups.
I think we predate the concept of incubator, but we've been doing social startup for a very long time.
Fantastic. Okay, so I'd love to ask some questions about what that involves here in Australia. But before we do that, your background is incredibly diverse. You've done a lot of different things. Who were you before Enactus Australia, and how did you end up leading like the largest social enterprise incubator in the world here in Australia?
Well, once upon a time I went to uni and I did a degree in industrial design. If anyone studied industrial design, you'll understand it's a really broad degree. And then I went out into industry. I worked for a lot of the large global surfing brands in procurement design. And I noticed a lot of social inequity in management and production systems, and also sustainability issues. So I was sort of solving some of these social inequity challenges, like removing slavery from our supply chains and making sure we're using sustainable materials, and creating innovative methods for transporting goods so that they cost less, and reducing waste in our manufacturing stream. So I was always problem solving for better planet and better social outcomes. And then I finished up there and I started my own startup. So I founded the first large-scale digital printing business in Australia.
Wow.
Co-founded it, and we did that for quite some time. So everyone's got one in their backyard now, but we had the first 3 machines in Australia, and we were doing printing for some big brands. But I didn't love it, and then I started up a kite surfing company. Making kite surfing gear, and then got sucked into university to become an academic, and I do a lot of design work as an academic, and was very interested in teaching entrepreneurship at university. And then I suppose I got involved with Enactus about 15 years ago at UNSW, and when the role came up for CEO, it was the right time to leave the uni and look at a new career out in the social sector, or the third sector as it's called.
Wonderful. And so from printing to kite surfing equipment manufacturer to university academic, and I did a look at your LinkedIn before, a variety of different things in different parts of the world as well. And you got involved in Enactus 15 years ago and then became the CEO 2.5, 3 years ago, you said?
Yeah, so I was a volunteer faculty advisor for a long time. And then the CEO, who had been in the role for 22 years, stepped down, and I was really fortunate to be in the right place at the right time and have the right skill set to take on a new challenge. Right at the end of COVID, when it was All the students had been running remotely for a while. So it's been a really big challenge to reinvigorate our organisation, but we've done it, and it's very rewarding to be able to say yes to that.
Wonderful. Because I'd love to explore so a lot of our audience here today are new startup members, part of our community. They're people who are interested in the startup space. More broadly, especially people who are watching online. So I'd love to dive into what are some of the things that we can learn from that space. But before we dive into that, you mentioned the third sector, you mentioned social enterprise. Tell us a bit about that, because I think that there's a lot of people who are interested in making a difference, interested in having what their startup does contribute to something. And one side that we often talk about is the make money, make new ideas, get the funding, do the sales, make the tech thing, and the third sector, isn't exclusive. Doesn't exclude that, but it's this slightly different lens, a slightly different approach, but no less valuable and growing, if I'm led to believe. So tell us a bit about the third sector and why should people care? Yeah,
well, the third sector has traditionally been charities, but the charity model and the philanthropic model isn't a particularly sustainable way to deliver long-term social or environmental change. And so creating a social or environmentally oriented business with a proper business model so it's ongoing and sustainable is the most sustainable way to provide proper services to the environment and to people. So the sector has been formalising in Australia recently over the last 3 or 4 years, and we've now got state bodies and a federal body, and they commissioned a report recently, and the report has turned up some really interesting stats. So the social sector, the social entrepreneurship sector, is the fastest growing enterprise sector in Australia. It's larger than it employs more people than the mining sector,
wow,
which is pretty big, and it's we sort of social enterprise isn't one business model, so there's lots of different ways you can set up a social entrepreneurship. Some businesses just run like a normal business and put a percentage of their profit back in to doing good. Others create their business specifically to serve a purpose or a community. But it's a way that you can tie your passion for change to having a career, delivering that change, and it's really rewarding. We find particularly young people who have these amazing new skill sets they're developing at university, want to learn about entrepreneurship, but they want to do something that's going to change the world. And social enterprise is a great vehicle for doing that.
Perfect. Now, the UTS Startups community, like the people here in the room are part of a community of over 700 startups. What are some of the things that you've seen from within your community, which is like 800 plus, you were saying, that startups who are here, who are members, like what can they learn from, I guess, being in that space? Like, so we want to support startups, we want to support startups to be able to support each other. What are some of those takeaways that you've seen of what's worked really well throughout your
So I'm going to do your trick of asking a couple of questions. So who's got a startup here in the UTS startup ecosystem? Okay. Keep your hand up if it's a tech startup. Okay, who hasn't? So who's got a non-tech startup? Oh, it's a hybrid, is it? Okay, so what we find at universities is that the majority of startup support ecosystems have been developed around the premise that everyone's doing a tech-based startup. And it's because it's super easy, you can attract the engineers in, you can bring some marketing dudes in and a few design things to sort of cover the corners. But social startups, like much more difficult to incubate and deliver because you need a much more transdisciplinary team. There's a lot of research involved. You're generally not doing it so you can get to Series A funding status. You're looking at creating a small, sustainable business that maybe will employ a few people. You're not looking to go big and become a unicorn. Occasionally you do get social unicorns, so that's fine. But so I think the universities are not particularly well set up to support the development of social enterprises, and I think that's where Enactus fits. And in fact, at all the universities that Enactus is at, they their teams have all been operating longer than any of the startup spaces at the uni.
There you go.
So it's quite interesting to think about. And they may attach themselves or associate with it, but it's not necessarily the best space for social startup to happen. I think that's a little bit sad, but I think it's also a little bit about why, sort of highlights why universities have startup spaces. They want the next Atlassian to happen at their uni so they can get funding from them, that kind of thing. It's very nuts and bolts, but I think it would be fantastic, particularly for research, commercialisation and student interest, to be more broad in the way that we approach startup, because we had a fantastic team here at UTS and they had a project that was a disability tech project that won money and awards for being a great tech project, but also having that disability overlay. So the complexity on that is that they needed a team that had social workers in it that understand how to work in the space. They needed someone from marketing. They needed someone else who can build the app that was. So it was a very complex project that was being worked on. It's not quite as simple as a widget or just an app.
Okay, great. And given that a lot of these university Enactus chapters and just for everyone's context, like I was when I was studying here at UTS, the Enactus was still around under the old name, SIFE, Students in Free Enterprise.
Yeah.
And it was around back then and around long before UTS Startups was a thing. What are some of the things that you've seen really, really work that we can kind of learn, or startups can learn from being that sustainable, ongoing support for new ideas and new projects?
One thing that the Enactus teams do really well is have communities. So it's a long weekend this weekend, and I've been looking at our social media, and every uni team's got something happening this weekend, like a camping trip or go on a bushwalk and pick up waste, or let's go volunteer somewhere kind of thing. So it's this beautiful community of change makers supporting each other, as well as creating change projects. And I think they're just anyone in the social space has to be good at community development. And in fact, if you think anyone who's got a startup, the weakest point of, to the factors of your success beyond having a product is being able to build a community around it. So it's a great set of skills to have culturally. And I think more to the question is what these guys bring to a startup space is a wider variety of people. And I think we need to understand that there are more female founders in the social startup space than in the traditional tech startup space. So it's not only the diversity in the projects and the skill sets, but we get a lot more gender and ethnic diversity in our teams, because there's we've got this fantastic project at the University of Melbourne at the moment.
Yes.
Majority international students, and they've founded a project called Stint. It's just won the City of Melbourne Award for social enterprises, and they have developed a community of about 6,000 international students, and they've become an international student employment service. So they help businesses engage with international students for long-term employment post-graduation, but also part-time employment, which is really fantastic, because it's in Melbourne there was a lot of problems with international students not having enough work to feed or house themselves during COVID. So it's a resilience measure, and I think having that in your startup space is an amazing thing to do.
Absolutely. And along those lines, you mentioned that female founder participation is increased diversity in the social enterprise space. Like, what are some of the other things that you can see the broader startup space should be doing? Like, what are some of the things that all of us can take on in kind of elevating those, given the success in this space?
Yeah, your founders are more likely to stay on and really push to the success of a social startup, because it's not just them that lose out if it fails. They have a community that they need to support. So I think on average the standard startup will run for about 18 months.
Okay.
And I think until it they give up if it's not working. Yes. Whereas a social startup will stick in for about 36, like almost twice as long, and so they have a higher rate of stickiness and success, because there's more a push to make it successful. You also find that the founders are a little bit more conservative and measured, and also female founders tend to get better stats on success rate as well. So that's where we sit.
And do you find that, so a lot of the stereotypical early stage startups will be 2-3 people, maybe more if that. Do you find that that's a similar sort of size of team, or are the teams a lot larger in the social enterprise space?
I can't speak for the whole social enterprise space, but for the Enactus teams, we tend to have 5 to 7 people on average working on a startup idea, and they'll incubate it very carefully and do a whole lot of good design thinking and human-centered design, also trauma-informed design. There's a whole lot of new innovation methods that are bubbling out of the social space that you don't see in other spaces, because there's a lot more complexity and different things that you need to deal with, particularly when you're looking at social problems. And so we tend to find that you need the larger team to be able to bridge all of that knowledge. There's also a collegiate sort of cooperative sharing much more deeply than other, because they're not competitors with each other. They've got their problem in their location, so they're happy to share. Knowledge sharing is much more prevalent amongst the teams as well.
Yeah. Now, just on that note, I know our UTS Startup support team were in the room, and you mentioned bushwalks and go to the beach and doing different activities. Just hands up in the room if just a straw poll for our support colleagues. Who'd love to do some kind of activity where it was linked to a social impact outcome, where you got to socialize and hang out with other UTS Startups community members or people interested in this kind of thing? Hands up if you'd be interested in that. Okay.
Oh, right. There we go.
Okay, good. Okay, so already a couple of things that we can start to pick up. Now, in a moment, I'm going to throw to the audience to see if there's 1 or 2 questions, and we'll put those onto the live stream before we go to the top secret turned off Q&A. But before we, so just if you've got questions, start thinking about them. I'll ask you in a moment. But what's coming up next for Enactus? You mentioned a number of new projects and initiatives. Things are looking very exciting. Is there anything that you'd like to share with us? And how can people get involved?
We're at a scale stage, which is kind of I'm always still got my entrepreneurial hat on. I was excited. So we've been working in Australia for quite an extended period of time, and we're just about to expand our practices across to universities in the Pacific Islands through partnerships between universities and also into New Zealand. And potentially next we'll go into Singapore. So quite excited about that, which will then, I think, give us 14 more countries in our network and give us a really strong APAC impact ability. The reason we do that is because it helps us develop better partnerships with our partners that support what we do, and it gives them more reach, and it allows us to, say for example, we've got one partner where we're looking at a plastics challenge at the moment, and it's great to work on a plastics challenge in a country like Australia, but there's other countries that have much worse plastic challenges than us, because we at least have an ecosystem that supports recycling, and we've got a GDP that the average income allows people to live to a standard where we're not reusing the plastic until it sort of falls apart. But there are lots of other countries across the Pacific that have really bad plastics issues, because they don't have the facilities to work with it. So if we can work with our partner, we can do first world, and then we can do developing world problems at the same time. Some of the insights we can get here, we can apply there, and vice versa. And I find a lot of the behaviour change happens much better in that context, and then can be transferred over. So this knowledge sharing, same problems, different solutions in different places.
So that definitely sounds very exciting, like lots of expansion and lots of that opportunity to bring new ideas together.
Yeah. And the second big one is that we're just launched today a challenge with 2 cohorts for next year across all the MBA programs in Australia. So if anyone doing an MBA here, you'll have the option to, if your university takes this up, to be part of a national incubator for social startups.
Fantastic, fantastic. And what's just for everyone jumping online or everyone here, what's the website that people go to if they want to find out more?
We are enactusaustralia.org.
Okay. Enactusaustralia.org. We'll put that into the link. Are there any questions from the audience? I'm only going to take 1 or 2 before we turn the cameras off, turn the live stream off. Are there any questions for Selena, perhaps around some insights that you would like for your ideas or your startups or just the sector in general? Yes.
So I was just curious about what your key metrics are to measure kind of what is a community. I mean, I know it's a difficult question. So Janet, I was just wondering what sort of key metrics you tend to focus on and what sort of success looks like.
Yeah, so metrics is a really important thing in social enterprise, because you're delivering you develop outputs, which deliver outcomes, and then long term you have an impact. So we need to measure all those things, and we need to build that in up front. So it's quite a challenge but it makes you think thoroughly about what you're doing and what the ramifications and long-term effects will be. How do we measure success? We generally, it's very different for every project, and that's why we have that metrics problem. But for example, for me, I measure the success on the number of teams that we've got, the number of people we've got in teams, the number of projects that are running, the number of people impacted positively by those projects, the number of partners that we bring in, the number of people we can educate. So for me, it's mostly quantitative, but for a lot of people, if you're trying to lift or raise, say, someone's quality of life, then there'll be qualitative measurements as well. So we use mixed methods to establish our success.
Okay, a question at the back?
Yeah, sorry, I think you briefly maybe sort of touched on it previously when you were talking about the duration of startups. But what would you say would be the role for expectation as a founder in the success of a startup?
So I'll repeat that for the camera. What's the role of expectation in the role of in having success as a founder? So is that like the role of having expectations and setting those expectations?
Yeah, I think you're talking about founder mindset, and potentially, I think, look, I've worked across all types of projects and funding, not just enterprise, and I think everyone's driven differently, but the commonality in social enterprises is that there is a social or environmental good and a social contract that needs to be delivered on, and so that removes it from you a personal responsibility. It's like a societal or an environmental responsibility, and I think that's what drives those founders to stick at it for longer and harder, and because they've got an externality that they're dealing with.
Okay, so before we turn off the live stream, what's one thing that you could say that almost every startup founder, regardless if they're in the social enterprise space or not, could benefit from, like taking action on, from what you've learned and your experience?
Authenticity, and we talk a lot about bringing yourself to your startup and being you, but it's exhausting trying to be something other than you are. And I think the nice thing about social startup is that it allows you to be that eccentric, different person, and I think often a lot of founders put a hell of a lot of pressure on themselves to be perfect or ideal, and I think that the thing that I learned from all the startups that I've dealt with is that the people that are comfortable in their own skin tend to do better mentally, and also tend to be able to go at it longer, and to attract a team that wants to work with them much better.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being here, Selena. We'll give you a round of applause in a moment, but just for everyone on camera who's watching the live stream, thanks for being here with us. We'll be turning off the camera in a moment. We are here every single Friday. We open the doors at 3:30. The live stream starts at 4 here at UTS Startups at Central, which is part of the Tech Central precinct. And in a moment, we'll be diving into off-camera, off-stream Q&A, followed by community networking. So please come along in person next time and join us. Selena, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you.